Hello, I'm Casey Aiken, and this is 21 This Week. Coming up next, lame duck Montgomery Council announces possible regressive tax on soda, considering additional requirements on residential housing development, and prevents the Old Anglers Inn from building a wedding and banquet venue. 300 murders and counting in Baltimore. Community proposes second no-murder weekend as city government fails to solve the problem. After 2 centuries of marketing itself as George Washington's church, Christ Church in Alexandria will remove the plaque honoring the first president. And is it possible that the Virginia governor's race can get uglier? Stay tuned. Our panel of insiders will give you the story behind the story. We're joined by the past president of Progressive Maryland, Elbridge James, Secretary of the Maryland Republican Party, Mark Uncapher, and Republican activist Phil Bell. Stay tuned for these stories and more on the next 21 This Week. The Montgomery County Council seems unusually active these days, whether it's because there are 3 council members seeking to become county executive, or the fact that 4 council members are lame ducks and out of office when their term expires in 2018. Nonetheless, whatever the reason, their county council has been in the midst of making proposals and passing legislation. This week, outgoing council member Nancy Florine proposed major changes in the moderately priced dwelling unit program that would impose additional fees on developers of small-sized projects, making those developments more expensive, all in the name of creating more affordable housing. Last week, council members Tom Hucker and Hans Reimer announced that they were exploring a tax on sweetened beverages like soda pop in order to fund early childhood education programs. And finally, the council passed legislation which effectively prevents Old Anglers Inn in Potomac from building a banquet hall to hold weddings. Phil, we talk a lot about the unfriendly business atmosphere in Montgomery County. Isn't the decision by the council to block the owners of Old Anglers Inn from building a banquet hall on their property more reinforcement of that view?
Absolutely it is, Casey. Not only is this punitive, because you're actually looking at one person or a couple of people and saying thou shalt not, but it's a great example of how economic development should not be done. We have a tradition, not just here in Montgomery County, but across the country, of saying, let's go find somebody else from outside of this county, the city, the state, to bring them in, and they're going to create jobs. Well, here's somebody that wants to create jobs and opportunity locally, and they're being told, no, you can't do that, and that's not acceptable.
Well, the residents, you know, and you have the community that's evidently spoken up and saying, we do not want this additional headache. We don't want the traffic, we don't want the noise, and we don't want just the up and down nature of banquet halls to be in this neighborhood. It's not like the county doesn't have plenty of banquet halls.
Elbridge, you know what they want? They want to continue to use Old Anglers parking lot so they can go hiking on the C&O Canal. That's the real reason. They're upset because they're going to lose some of their parking spaces.
You know, the owners of the Angler Inn should have turned around then and negotiated and worked with that community. When they didn't, let's face it, we talk about community having voice. This is clearly one where the community had voice.
But Elbridge, would you negotiate with me if I wanted to use your front lawn as a parking lot so I could go to the house next door? You probably wouldn't be very happy with that. What this speaks to is a larger problem that we have in general, which is a lack of recognition that, yes, there must be business. There must be, in some cases, some discomfort with what goes on. We have to grow in order to have success.
The Old Anglers Inn is not necessarily a no business, no growth policy. There are other projects that go on in this county.
Well, but this is symptomatic of a lot of the problems that Montgomery has of the non-business friendly identity that it's developing. We're going to have to go on to another part of this topic. Elbridge, there are times when the council engages in social engineering. I know that comes as a shock to you, and in this case, they're wrapping it up in a worthy cause, that of childhood education. They want to put a tax on the sale of soda pop.
We put a tax on the sale of cigarettes that do harm to our community. Soda and sweetener and diabetes and other childhood and adult pain and problems have to have remedies. I'm from Philadelphia, where the soda tax was not exactly the most popular thing to do, but it has benefited the city and especially its younger citizens with the early education programs and all other things.
Do you know what our budget is in Montgomery County? Do you know how many billions of dollars goes to education in Montgomery County? Almost 55% of the budget goes to education in Montgomery County.
And
why do we need to increase it even more? Mark.
Well, my question is should somebody who has a low body mass index get a refund from the tax as a result of, I mean, if it's supposed to be punitive, if it's supposed to affect behavior, then we ought to have this complicated program where you can get your money back. What do you say?
I love. Wait a minute. We got to go down. But Mark's proposal is the no fat ass tax. I really like. I really like that, Mark. Mark, doesn't the proposal by Nancy Fleury to add additional development fees on housing development projects of less than 20 units seem like a counterproductive means of spurring development of affordable housing? It's just going to increase the cost of more housing.
Exactly, and we clearly have an affordable housing shortage in Montgomery County, but it's a government-created shortage. It's a function of our zoning and regulatory schemes that prop up the value of housing, but also make it less attainable. Look at the way we do affordable housing in Montgomery County. About $250 million goes to the Opportunities Commission, Housing Opportunities Commission, works out to about $18,000 a unit. You look at elsewhere in the country, housing is more affordable. There are options like using manufactured homes, but that's not available in Montgomery County because it conflicts with our snob zoning, which requires minimum acreage and that sort of thing.
Well, Phil, this goes right back to the first topic we talked about, which is the business friendly. The fact is we have isolated thousands of acres in the agricultural zone that we cannot build on other than McMansions. We are starving ourselves of housing because of our regulatory proposals. This doesn't make any sense.
I see housing pop up all over the county. So in terms of having space for housing, we have space available. I'm not saying that, in fact, this proposal is the best, but again, going back to, as I said earlier, with the business community through its Chamber of Commerce and its trade associations have the ample opportunity not to play, oh, I hate everything, but to come up with a grand scheme and wait a minute, and the resources to wrap it up.
Mark, we got to wrap it up, Mark.
It is the unintended consequences of the ag reserve policy. The minimum zoning made housing that much more expensive and crammed it into a higher density area. It was not, they didn't set out to do that, but that's been the result.
All right, we got to go on to our next topic. Several weeks ago, when civic groups called for a murder-free weekend in Baltimore City, there was much conjecture about the efficacy of such a move, and in many ways, Baltimore was just as violent that designated weekend as any other weekend, and was as usual. Now that the murder rate has claimed 300 lives, civic leaders are calling for a second no-murder weekend in hopes that something, anything, can be done to stem the violence in their neighborhoods. Phil Bell, while the first attempt at a no-murder weekend was met with derision, does the fact that the community is so tired, so frustrated with the business-as-usual city government that it is rising up to denounce the violence in their midst? They're grasping for any solution.
Well, I hope they are grasping for a solution, actually looking for a way to bring this about. What has to happen is not just saying to have the idea of a murder-free weekend. It's about the culture. It's about people there who say, we don't want to see this anymore, being willing to go to others, those who are not dressing correctly, not talking correctly, not acting correctly, and saying that's not acceptable here, and actively driving that out. That's how you'll get it, and that's also how you're going to see change in that city government, because the people there who've allowed it to fail and been willing to work with decline and embrace it will no longer be allowed to be served.
Elbridge, is there a solution here?
There's been a solution has started. With the election of Catherine Pugh and some of the change of the council, the message is being sent that no business is not as usual. I agree that the citizens, though, need to step up and be more proactive. The religious leaders, the community leaders, everybody. This is a whole community effort. It's not just being put on the backs of the police or, in fact, the government. You need the whole community to step up. One of the concerns I have is the fact is that I'm not going to go up to somebody and say you're dressing incorrectly. There's some things that, in fact, I need to gain momentum and not put people down. There are things that need to be done where I encourage better behavior.
Mark,
I have to
versus-
disagree with you. And I got to tell you, even though you and I disagree politically, you're the kind of person, someone who's had success, someone that puts out a good image, that needs to tell some of these people, you know what? You can't wear your pants halfway down your rear end. You can't act like an idiot. And no, being a thug is not a good thing. They need to hear that, and they need to
Let me give you the
embrace
example of
it.
my church in Philadelphia. When some of the young ladies walked in inappropriate dress, they didn't go to them and say, that's inappropriate dress. What they did, they gave them scarves and covers and say, we welcome you in. Please wear this. Please.
I want to go to Mark on
Guys,
this.
we have a template for turning around the murder problem. In New York City, it was a change in the policing philosophy. And I lived in New York then when the murder rate was many times over. And it was a change in the policing. I'm not going to disagree with you about closing, but that wasn't what changed it. It was having police officers who were better trained at being able to detect people with guns. That was the fear. And that changed around. And the tragedy is that having had the lessons in some urban areas, that other urban areas have not been able to follow through.
Benchmarking. Better police community relations is the cornerstone on this. The community can't do it alone. We need the police department, which in fact under your current Attorney General is trying to go the other way.
Well, but Mark, I want to go into your example about New York City. Isn't that what led Baltimore to some of the problems that they have? Was over-aggressive policing?
Well, it's not. There's a continuum there. I think that the Baltimore police were not as well trained as the New York City
Correct.
police, and that led to some of the problems. We'll get into sort of specific cases. New York cops are very, very well trained. I don't think they would have made many of the mistakes that in the Freddie Gray situation that the Baltimore police did. And that's something that's got to get changed as well.
But there is a big part of what happened in New York City that in some respects speaks to what I'm talking about here in Baltimore. And when you look at the revitalization of 42nd Street, it made it inhospitable for a lot of the element that had been there to continue to be there.
Yes.
Well, while I don't think that Disney's going to come and rebuild, Disney and others are going to rebuild downtown Baltimore, what I do think is when you make it inhospitable for people to act and think the way they are, then it won't continue.
Now,
and that will
to
take
a
the
certain
murders
extent,
away.
Wrap it up.
I agree
Wrap
with
it up,
that.
Elbridge.
And in fact, I'm blaming certain past Democratic administrations for taking money that was geared towards the inner city and putting it in the Port of Baltimore, in the downtown area. Urban renewal money got taken, those block grants got taken from those who really needed it and gave it to those who wanted to afford other
You're
options.
going to have the last word on this. When we come back from this short break, why is Christ Church in Alexandria removing the historic plaques honoring George Washington? Has political correctness run amok? Stay tuned. And welcome back. George Washington, as we all know, was one of the leading founders of our country. He led the Revolutionary War against the British. He was elected the first president of the United States after the failed government created by the Articles of Confederation. In many ways, he founded the country. He also was the founder of Christ Church in Alexandria, Virginia. 200 years later, that same Christ Church is now removing a historic plaque honoring the first president and one that honored Robert E. Lee. And while church leaders deny that political correctness is the cause, many believe that is the reason. Mark, there are those that say there is only one who should be worshiped in a house of Christian prayer, and that's Christ, and argue that the memorials to Washington and Lee are historical relics and are of a gone-by era, and they should be done away with. What do you think?
Well, I think that certainly the president should be remembered there. My humble proposal is that we need to have a statute of limitation on controversy over statutes, and I'm going to amend that by saying plaques and memorial. We're spending too much time as a society these days arguing over these sort of identity-based arguments about values and history and what have you. Our history is our history, and in many ways these controversies are becoming more divisive and dividing us as a people.
But do you find any irony in the fact that Christ Church, which marketed itself as being George Washington's church, is now turning around because he's not politically correct?
And not only that,
taking away his
they became a tourist destination because of that and marketed themselves, and I'm sure collected some money as a result of that. And now they're turning their back on George
And
Washington.
now they're
Wait a minute.
now they're throwing them under the tourist bus.
Yeah,
There you
it's
go.
It's still the tourism that's driving everything. But let's face this also. The fact is that we have given statues and plaques to folks that actually committed treason to this country. I'm not saying George Washington.
Oh, I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, but Robert E. Lee, committed treason to this country. The other concern I have, and I want to go back off of this also, the fact is that after the Civil War, Robert Lee did a lot of things for reconciliation and healing that no one speaks to. In fact, I just recently learned this because of this show and preparing for this show. And so we need to, in fact, Christ Church had a better opportunity to talk about Robert E. Lee and his moments, in fact, of trying to heal the country. If you want to have it there, that was a good learning opportunity. But with regard to some of the other statutes that are around, no, they need to have been removed. There are a lot of folks, my folks, me, who in fact have been abused and harassed by these statues, and in fact that glorify slavery. And that is not a place.
I want to talk about the Christ Church situation. Yeah.
Now, I attend another one of George Washington's churches, the Falls Church Anglican, and I'm a former Episcopalian. I thought the reasoning behind removing the statues was totally bunk, for lack of a better phrase, because they're saying, well, it's inhibiting people to come to our church, which is not true. The fact is the Episcopal Church as a whole, because they have become less Christ-centered, that's the real reason for their drop-off in attendance in general. Yeah. So that's something that they're not willing to talk about, and I really feel like, and I hate to say this, but feel like they're using this as an opportunity simply to get their name out there.
All right. Well, we're going to go on to our next topic, because there's no question that the statues have become very controversial, and it's only going to continue. Now, turning to our last topic, political campaigns, they get nasty, especially when stakes are high. Having nominated a middle-of-the-road Republican as its candidate for governor, Republicans in Virginia hope to distance themselves from the Trump effect. But of course, that's not the way things work today. First, Ed Gillespie tried to link Democrat Ralph Northam with the El Salvadorian crime gang MS-13. So in response, Democrats portrayed Trump voters running over Muslims in a pickup truck with Confederate flags. Just one problem. The ad ran the same week. A Muslim man ran over Americans in a pickup truck. Can political campaigning ever focus on what matters, Mark?
Well, I think that's really the tragedy of this whole conversation, is that actually the two candidates are more centrist in general, and that they're sort of exposing their differences in this particular issue. And there are real issues in Virginia, and there are real differences of opinion, and it's a shame that the issues are kind of turning on this kind of stuff.
Phil, this is a loaded question. Are all Trump voters, and I know you're a Trump voter,
I am,
white supremacists who run over kids with a pickup truck?
Well, not only am I a Trump voter, but I also drive a black pickup truck just like they have in this infamous ad, although mine's a Dodge and theirs is a Ford. Look, we're not white supremacists. We don't run over Muslim kids. The funny part is just that the Northam campaign at first, we kind of embrace this ad, but we don't really embrace this ad. We didn't have anything to do with it, but they got the money for it from the Latino Voters Fund. It is a perfect example of what politics should not be. They are robbing us by doing this, the opportunity to learn about who Ralph Northam or Ed Gillespie are and what they would do for the state. I'm a proud person, proud to support Ed Gillespie, and I'm looking for him to have a big
I got to
win.
tell you, all I know about these two candidates is that it's Enron Ed, and that Ralph Northam is in support of sanctuary cities. That's about all you've heard of out of this entire race, and it's going to come to a head in 5 days.
I've heard more about both of the candidates, but in fact, as you're saying, the national politics are blurring the lines. And now you have the surrogates that are now turning around and doing he say, she say. And it's the voters in Virginia that should have the opportunity to go to the poll.
Mark, I want to ask you a question.
Sure.
How important is this race in the scheme of things for national politics?
Well, Virginia has always been this bellwether election. Frankly, it's had a history of usually the governor is from the party opposite whoever's elected. That's not what happened 4 years ago, but there's been this long history of being a counter-cyclical cycle. we'll see what happens this year. But I think it goes to, it's not what the question you asked, but one of the reasons Larry Hogan, I think, does so well is because as a politician, he said what he was going to do and tries very hard to focus and stay clear of kind of all this other kinds of stuff. And I think in Maryland is one of the reasons for his popularity is because of that discipline of letting this clutter kind of stay by the side.
But I haven't heard any of the other candidates in Virginia say what they're going to do. And I mean, it's not like they haven't said it. It just hasn't
it doesn't get through. No, I understand. Yeah.
Well, and to answer your question too, I think nationally it's going to be a big deal because with Gillespie likely to win, that's going to be another example of Democrats trying and failing and striking out in a high-profile situation.
Well, let's ask the other, who's going to win this race? Mark.
It's darn close, and the polls are frankly divided, but that reflects the difficulty of figuring out who exactly comes out on election day in an off year. I think Gillespie has the momentum, though.
Elbridge.
He has the momentum, but Northern Virginia is going to vote for the Democrat. And it depends on how many come out and vote.
Well, that's the problem.
And we know who you're voting for, so we don't have any problem.
You're voting in Virginia?
Stay tuned for parting shots when we come back. And welcome back. Now with parting shots, Mark Uncapher.
Casey, here's a story. I found it unusual, but there's a delegate from Tacoma Park who I agree with, David Moon. So I think when Republicans and Democrats agree, we should highlight that. David Moon has introduced a bill to focus on the tax exemption that golf clubs, golf courses in Montgomery County, that's where he's focusing on, but in general in the state, is where they get a $1,000 per acre rate if they agree to certain kinds of provision, which dramatically reduces their tax. I don't see any reason why golf clubs should have that tax advantage. I applaud David Moon for his proposal. I know, David, you may not like that, but that's...
Mark, I'm biting my tongue. Elbridge James, your parting shot.
This country's faced with a serious drug epidemic. And it's not just the opioids. We talk about crack cocaine and some other drugs that we need to have a serious look at the options in terms of helping our citizens overcome these dilemmas. We're all in this together, whether you use or don't use.
And Phil Bell.
I would like to applaud CSX Transportation President and Chief Executive E. Hunter Harrison for declining to take the federal and state money to expand a rail tunnel in Baltimore. There has never been a very good economic justification for that in the first place, and the $150+ million that the state would have contributed to that can be better used on other transportation options to improve it, while his railroad continues to do very well.
Thank you, Phil. Now I have an announcement to make. Sometime next week, I'm going to go over to the Office of the Voter Registration, and I'm going to change my registration from Republican to Democrat. And I'm doing it for one reason, so I can vote in the primary that'll come up, because there's not a Republican in Montgomery County running for county executive that's got a snowball's chance in hell of getting elected. So if I want to have a voice in my county politics, I got to play the game. If you can't beat them, I'm going to join them. Thank you for tuning in each and every week for Montgomery County's hardest hitting political talk show. For 21 this week, I'm Casey Aiken.